Nixon's Administration and Watergate Scandal by Mabel Kim and Laura Veras. The period of Nixon's administration is definitely one to be remembered. He had been elected in 1968 on a dual promise to end the war in Vietnam and mend the divisiveness within the U.S. that the war had created. Nixon aggressively moved to fulfill both pledges. Not only did he create and strengthen various diplomatic ties with powerful nations such as the USSR and China, he also de-escalated America's involvement in Vietnam and oversaw peace negotiations with North Vietnam. He also created political tactics such as the Southern Advantage and the distribution of the federal power to state powers, where local governments were seen. Richard Nixon was a smart president. However, power managed to blind him and stopped him from thinking things through before executing a plan. He also proved his term to have two faces. One, that although it didn't fully support liberals, it sympathized with them. The other was completely and highly strict conservative government. Although Nixon supported a number of congressional measures to increase federal spending for some social programs and increase Social Security and Medicare, he unsuccessfully tried to eliminate the Job Corps program that provided job training for the unemployed. And in 1970, he vetoed a bill to provide additional funding for housing and urban development. In 1969, he ordered the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare to delay desegregation plans for school districts in South Carolina and Mississippi. In a further attempt to chip away at civil rights advances, Nixon once again unsuccessfully opposed the extension of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Already planning his re-election for a second term, Nixon made sure that with his every move he won the Southern people over. During his term, one of the biggest problems facing Nixon was a weak economy, which was caused by the government spending on social programs, or the Great Society. Also, the war in Vietnam, as well as the nation's need for foreign oil. Nixon tried various methods to help the economy, which all failed in their own unique way. Much like presidents in our country today, Nixon used the full resources of his office, sometimes illegally. He often withheld necessary funds for programs, thus holding up their implementation. His administration even used the Internal Revenue Service to audit the tax returns of anti-war and civil rights activists. Nixon began building a personal enemies list of prominent Americans whom the administration would harass. This corruption leads us to the Watergate scandal. Early in the morning of June 17, 1972, several burglars were arrested inside the office of the Democratic National Committee located in the Watergate building in Washington, D.C. This was no ordinary robbery. The prowlers were connected to President Richard Nixon's re-election campaign, and they had been caught while attempting to wiretap phones and steal secret documents. In spite of the publicized break-in, President Nixon won in a landslide. However, the story soon grew into importance. The public learned that the Watergate burglars had been financed from a slush fund, a secret money account that might have been linked to the president. In 1973, the U.S. Senate authorized a full investigation. In the summer of 1973, the Senate began its hearings. During the testimony, they learned about a recording system installed in the White House, one that taped practically every conversation held in the Oval Office. The Senate committee insisted on having the tapes from the White House, so they could establish if the president knew about the break-in or the attempted cover-up that followed. The president resisted, claiming that the conversations were protected under executive privilege. According to President Nixon, the conversations held in the Oval Office were matters of national security. To make them public would prevent him from receiving frank advice and could endanger the country. However, Archibald Cox insisted on having the tapes. On October 20, 1973, President Nixon fired Cox, and his deputy, William Ruckelshaw, resigned in protest. The Saturday Night Massacre, as it came to be called, convinced many Americans that the president was hiding something. Nixon denied this, claiming at a news conference, "I'm not a crook." Eventually, the issue ended up in the Supreme Court. On July 24, 1974, the court ruled unanimously that the president had to release the tapes, and Nixon finally relented. During the examination of the tapes, investigators found an 18.5-minute gap in the conversation. The president's secretary claimed she had accidentally recorded over this portion of the tape, which was later deemed unlikely. Nixon's term ended when he was asked to resign due to the Watergate scandal. The end.